You said something 3 hours ago, maybe 3 days ago, and your brain is still running the tape. You are lying in bed, or sitting in traffic, or trying to focus on something else entirely, and without any invitation, the conversation plays back. You hear your own words, you cringe. You think of the better version of what you should have said. You wonder what they thought of you. And then, if you are particularly unlucky, the whole thing starts again from the beginning. This is not a quirk. It is not a sign of anxiety, or insecurity, or an excess of self-consciousness. It is one of the most universal features of the human mind, and understanding why it happens will tell you something important about what your brain is actually for. The replay of social interactions is a phenomenon that neuroscientists and psychologists have studied under several different names: rumination, post-event processing, mental replay. But what they all point to is the same underlying mechanism: the social brain's attempt to extract meaning and lesson from interactions that it has flagged as unresolved. To understand why your brain does this, you have to first understand what it is trying to accomplish. Your brain is not, at its core, a thinking machine. It is a prediction machine. Everything it does is oriented toward one central goal: building accurate models of the world so it can predict what will happen next and prepare an appropriate response. And the most important, most complex, and most consequential part of the world your brain has to model is other people. Psychologist Matthew Lieberman at UCLA, whose research on the social brain we have encountered before, found that the human brain devotes an extraordinary amount of its processing power to social cognition, understanding other people's intentions, emotions, beliefs, and likely future behavior. This is not a luxury function. It is the primary function, and it is running almost constantly, even when you are not consciously thinking about social interactions at all. When a social interaction ends, your brain does not simply file it away and move on. It runs a kind of after-action review. It compares what happened to what it predicted would happen. It checks whether the social goals you had going into the interaction were achieved. It looks for signals about how you are perceived, whether the relationship is secure, and whether there are threats or opportunities in your social environment that require a response. This process is largely automatic. You do not choose to replay conversations. Your brain initiates the replay because it has determined that the interaction contains unresolved information that needs further processing. The key word there is unresolved. Research by psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik in the early 20th century demonstrated what became known as the Zeigarnik effect. People have a significantly better memory for incomplete or interrupted tasks than for tasks they have successfully finished. The brain holds unfinished business in working memory and returns to it repeatedly until it can be closed. Social interactions that ended ambiguously or that produced outcomes different from what you expected, or where you said something you now wish you had said differently. These register as unfinished in the brain's accounting system, and so the brain keeps returning to them, trying to resolve them. This is why the replay almost always focuses on the moments that went wrong, or that might have gone wrong, rather than the moments that went well. A successful interaction that produced exactly the outcome you wanted does not trigger the same degree of replay, because the brain's prediction model was confirmed and the interaction can be filed as closed. An interaction where something felt off, where you are not certain how you came across, where an ambiguous silence or a strange expression left you uncertain about the other person's state. That interaction stays open. And the brain keeps running it back, looking for information it might have missed the first time. There is also a deeply social reason for this. Humans are extraordinarily dependent on their reputations. In the ancestral environment, how other people perceived you determined your access to cooperation, to resources, to protection, and to mates. A reputation damaged by a single interaction could have consequences that rippled across your entire social world for years. The brain evolved to take social evaluation very seriously, and that means it takes any ambiguity in social evaluation very seriously. If you are not certain how someone perceived you, the safest course is to keep thinking about it, because missing a threat to your reputation could be catastrophic, while the cost of a little extra worry is low. Rumination, in this frame, is not a malfunction. It is a risk management strategy. Psychologist Susan Nolen-Hoeksema at Yale University spent decades studying rumination and found that people who replay negative events and interactions tend to do so in a particular way. focused on the distress itself rather than on potential solutions. She called this response-focused rumination, as opposed to reflection, which is more problem-oriented and tends to produce better outcomes. The painful irony is that the brain initiates the replay in order to learn something and resolve the uncertainty. But when the replay becomes stuck in an emotional loop rather than moving toward a conclusion, it tends to deepen distress rather than resolve it. What does the replay feel like when it is working well versus when it is stuck? When it is working, the replay produces a shift. You arrive at a reframing of what happened. You see the other person's perspective more clearly. You identify what you would do differently. You revise your model of the relationship, and the conversation becomes less vivid and less intrusive as the brain marks it as processed. When the replay is stuck, you circle the same moments over and over. The emotional intensity does not diminish. The conversation remains just as vivid on the 15th replay as on the first. And the brain keeps returning to it precisely because it has not found the resolution it was looking for. There is an additional feature of social replay that makes it particularly hard to stop: the involvement of the default mode network. This is a set of brain regions that activates specifically during rest, daydreaming, and internally directed thought. Research by neuroscientist Marcus Raichle at Washington University discovered that this network, rather than going quiet when you stop doing a task, actually becomes more active. The default mode network is your brain's baseline state, and it defaults specifically to social thinking, imagining other people's mental states, replaying past social interactions, anticipating future ones. This is why conversations replay most vividly when you're trying to sleep or when your mind is not occupied by a demanding task. You are not choosing to think about that awkward conversation. Your brain's resting state simply goes there by default. Understanding this shifts the frame considerably. The replay is not a sign that you are unusually sensitive or that you need to learn to care less. It is a sign that your social brain is doing its job, flagging interactions that need more processing, running its after-action review, trying to update its models of your social world. The problem is not the replay itself. The problem arises when the replay gets stuck in a loop that generates distress without generating learning. What can actually interrupt the loop is what researchers call cognitive reappraisal, actively shifting the interpretation of what happened rather than passively reliving the emotional content. This is not telling yourself it does not matter. It is asking different questions of the memory. What was the other person likely experiencing? What is the most charitable interpretation of the ambiguous moment? What would you actually do differently, specifically, if you had the chance? These questions push the replay from passive distress toward active resolution, which is what the brain was trying to accomplish in the first place. So the next time you find yourself lying awake at 2 a.m, running a conversation from 3 weeks ago, for the 14th time, you are not broken. Your social brain is doing its job, imperfectly, in a world far more complex and far less forgiving of ambiguity than the one it was designed for. The tape plays because the brain has not yet found what it was looking for. And sometimes the most useful thing you can do is give it something more interesting to look at, because the conversation you keep replaying is the one your brain decided it was not finished with. And somewhere in that replay, your brain is still searching for the lesson it knows must be there.